Hello everyone, it's Tuesday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Po-kyung. A massive earthquake and tsunami struck Japan in 2011, destroying the Fukushima nuclear power plant. After the reactors melted down, Japan had to store tons and tons of radioactive contaminated water, and as the storage facility reaches its maximum capacity, Tokyo is now planning to discharge the wastewater from the plant. On this, South Korea made an agreement with Japan to dispatch an inspection team working separately from the IAEA later this month. Negotiations took place between Seoul and Tokyo over the size of the team and how extensive the assessment would be. So what should the South Korean team focus on in order for this inspection to be meaningful? For an in-depth analysis, we invite Walter Sim, Japan correspondent from the Strait Times. Walter, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
And we also have Dr. Arjun Makajani, president of the Institute for Energy and Environmental Research. Good to see you, Dr. Makajani.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you. Now, first question to our Walter. From the tsunami that led to a reactor meltdown at the Fukushima nuclear power plant to Japan's decision to release the radioactive water into the Pacific Ocean. For our viewers who might not be familiar with the issue, could you briefly elaborate on how the situation has developed?
Sure, definitely. So as you mentioned earlier, the disaster struck on March 11, 2011, when a magnitude 9.0 earthquake struck northeast Japan that unleashed a tsunami that inundated the Fukushima Daiichi power plant, causing meltdowns in 3 reactors. So as the plant is being decommissioned, the process still continues to generate contaminated water as a byproduct. Well, Japan is treating this water as via a process known as ALPS, which stands for the Advanced Liquid Processing System. So this process, in a nutshell, is able to remove all radioactive particles except an isotope known as tritium. Then this water is being stored in tanks at the Fukushima Daiichi plant, but Japan says the tanks will reach maximum capacity of 1.37 million tons by spring 2024, and this is going to hinder the decommissioning process. The IAEA says that tritium, which is a natural isotope of hydrogen, exists in rainwater and seawater, and hence is safe for consumption even if it is released into the Pacific Ocean. And the IAEA also says that tritium is a regular byproduct of nuclear plants around the world, including the United States, France, China, and South Korea as well. Japan did consider other possibilities, such as hydrogen release, long-term storage, and underground burial of the water, but these were eventually dismissed because Japan cites operational difficulties, whether due to a lack of advanced enough technology or because of a lack of space. Well, Japan is of course aware that its decision to release the water is politically and diplomatically toxic, but it is pressing ahead. It has said that it's not acting alone, but there is a multinational panel of experts from the IAEA involved in every single step of the way. The IAEA is also due to release a report in June. As for its neighbors, Japan is trying to pacify its neighbors, assuage its neighbors by promising to dilute the waters, dilute the levels of tritium in the water by 100 times more than necessary so as to meet the safety thresholds. And in doing so, Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has stressed that the water discharge will be unharmful, will not harm human lives or marine life. But of course, there's always the issue that, there are questions about the accuracy of Japan's data, with experts, including from the Pacific Island countries, saying that there are inconsistencies. There are also naturally bound to be anxieties amongst people, especially fishermen who rely on the oceans for their livelihoods, because this water release is going to be an irreversible process. So I think this is something that Japan has to be grappling with going forward.
Right, I see. So that's how the issue developed. Walter, I'd like to ask you one more question. Here in South Korea, rival parties are discussing how to refer to Fukushima nuclear power plant wastewater. I mean, the main opposition Democratic Party of Korea is saying that it should be wastewater or radioactive water, while some members of the ruling PPP want to call it treated water. What's Japan's point of view?
Well, that's a very interesting question because of the sensitivities involved, and Japan bristles at any description of the water as radioactive water or contaminated water, and Japan says that this is factually inaccurate. These terms are loaded because the water has been treated to remove all harmful contaminants. That's Japan's position. I'm not so sure about the term wastewater though, because on the surface it sounds quite neutral. But yes, treated water, as what the ruling PPP is suggesting, is also the preferred term in Japan because its position is that the water has been treated to remove these harmful substances.
Right, I see. Now, Dr. Makazani, the United Nations Nuclear Watchdog's 11-member task force has been already reviewing the water safety and will release its final report as early as June. What do we know about the IAEA's evaluation up till now?
If I might just make a couple of comments and a slight correction. Japan will not be removing all the other radionuclides. They will treat the water through this liquid processing system, but some of the other radionuclides will still remain. Strontium-90 with concentrates in the bone, in people, in fish, causes leukemia. Cesium-137, which goes to the muscles. So some contaminants will remain, much less than now, but not zero. Also, tritium is radioactive. So what Japan is doing, saying call it water and not radioactive, it called to my mind Shakespeare. Shakespeare in Romeo and Juliet, he said, a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. So what you call it doesn't change the fact. Tritium is radioactive hydrogen. Radioactivity is acknowledged by all authorities to be risky. Small dose, small risk, big dose, big risk, but not zero risk. US regulatory authorities acknowledge that, the ICRP acknowledges it. So to say that there's no harm and it's not, we can't call it radioactive water, is to put a public relations varnish on it in an inappropriate way. It is treated water. It will have less concentrations, but it will be radioactive when discharged. So the IAEA, in my opinion, has done a minimal and rather formal job of evaluating from the beginning, even before they had a single visit. The Inspector General the Director General of the IAEA already endorsed the water discharge in April 2021. He said that it is technically feasible, and this is a quote, technically feasible and in line with international practice, even though the large amount of water makes it unique and a complex case. Well, if it is a unique and a complex case, why did Director General Grossi already say it is technically feasible and in line with international practice? It's true that France and England and other countries, Korea, China, United States, are discharging water from routine nuclear power plants into the ocean, but that does not mean that that applies to an accidental situation, and it does not mean that it complies with all international standards. In fact, in my opinion, it does not comply with a particular IAEA standard. It's called General Safety Guide 8, and it's important for everyone to know that in its visits and inspection reports, the IAEA has not referred to General Safety Guide number 8. It has referred to other reports, and that it already endorsed water discharges without considering that safety report and without considering alternatives. We have, as the expert panel has been dismayed by the light way in which the IAEA has treated this question, and the fact that it has refused to consider alternatives that would not involve ocean discharges.
Right, I see, Doctor. Thank you for the correction, and I see your point. Now, Dr. Makazuni, one more question here. So South Korea, which is a part of an 11-member watchdog team reviewing the water safety, is the only country on the team dispatching a separate fact-finding mission to the plant. How significant is this?
Well, its significance will depend on what questions they ask and how much fact-finding they actually do. So in my opinion, if the visit is only confined to, inspection about the release of the water, then it will not be very significant. You can't actually inspect the functioning of the treatment system. That's all inside the box. We have said that we are not convinced that this system will operate consistently over 30 years. You can't inspect that. It's good to go to the site. It's good that Korea has a member on the task force and the delegation is going. It's good to see it. But the essential matters involve the questions that Japan and TEPCO and the IAEA have so far refused to answer. And I think the visit will be very fruitful if they do ask this question.
Right, I see. I cannot agree more. Now, Walter, let's tap on negotiations between Seoul and Tokyo here. They held a 12-hour-long negotiation over Seoul's inspection team, but there was apparently fierce wrangling between both sides, meaning details of the visit could not be settled yet. How have their views differed?
Well, indeed, the key differences appear to be over the scope of what the inspection team is going to be allowed to see and do. So wants to send 20 government experts to the Fukushima plant, and I do hope that the government experts raises the questions that has been mentioned as far. So that there's a proper review of the safety of the entire ocean discharge process, including, of course, Japan's water treatment facility, of course, its operations, its technologies, so as to measure the contamination levels in the treated water. Mr. Park Jo-hee, the Chancellor of the Korean National Diplomatic Academy, also said in a press conference in Tokyo today that it is Japan's responsibility to remain humble and modest, to continue explaining the facts, to explore any additional measures, given that there's the scientific and psychological elements of the water release, and I cannot agree more with that. That said, however, Japan does see the upcoming visit as more educational, if I may use the word. Its industry minister, Yasutoshi Nishimura, has said that the purpose was not to evaluate or certify the safety of the treated water, and this evaluation is in fact the responsibility of the IAEA, if I may quote him. Japan also notes that South Korea will be getting as much access as those by inspections of foreign delegations, such as from the US, Taiwan, and Pacific Island nations, which have gone on site in Fukushima before.
Right, I see. Now, Dr. Makazani, though further negotiation with Japan would be needed here, Seoul's original plan was to review the entire process involving how they dilute the wastewater using the ALPS system, and particularly how it works. However, many experts say it won't be the verification process Seoul wants it to be, saying even if the team sees how the water is filtered, they will have a very limited sample. And I know that you have already pointed out that it could be hard to become a verification process. Is this correct? Could you delve a little bit deeper into this?
Yeah. So the ALPS system has worked in the past and not worked in the past. So there's a long record that for the first few years it was not working well, and then TEPCO said it is working well. But in 2018, after there was a Kyoto News Service report, if I'm remembering correctly, TEPCO was forced to admit that for several years it had not been working well. The expert panel of the Pacific Islands Forum has raised questions about the functioning of ALPS and whether it has been properly tested. So proper testing is not for 1 or 2 days. Proper testing means testing the different kinds of water, the water in the different tanks. So for example, some tanks have sludges, particles in them that are settled at the bottom. We have raised questions as to whether that water can be properly treated. And so far as I understand, Japan has not tested the ALPS system with the tanks where there are sludges. So the operation of this system an inspection team is good, but I can't say that it will really be able to inspect the things that matter and answer the questions that the expert panel has raised consistently for almost a year now with Japan and with the IAEA. And the IAEA has also not answered.
Right, I see how it's going. Now, Walter, discussion on who will be in the team has also been brought up. And South Korea says some 20 government experts will be on site for the review during the 4-day visit, which seems a little bit short. Though the actual size of the delegation is still under deliberation, government officials said that there is little possibility that members of civic groups will join the team. What's Japan's point of view on the inspection team itself?
Well, indeed, and I think that is Japan's position, not to allow members of civic groups in the team. Japan has said that this is purely a G2G, a government-to-government matter, and so it seems quite unlikely at this point that Japan will allow private members of civic groups, private experts to participate in the official delegation, though in my personal opinion, I do think that there is value in allowing private experts on board, given that, this is in the name of transparency. And if Japan can answer more questions, that would obviously be in its favor.
Right, I see. Now, Dr. Makazani, Seoul and Tokyo are to continue their negotiations to determine further details, such as who will inspect the crippled nuclear power plant and to what extent they will be allowed. Now, what details do you believe the inspection team has to focus on during negotiations to make the trip meaningful?
The main thing I would recommend that they focus on is whether this release of radioactive water, radioactively contaminated treated water, is necessary at all. So Walter has said they examined alternatives, but the expert panel suggested alternatives they have not examined. Specifically, we suggested that they treat the water as they plan now, treat it properly, and then use the water to make concrete. What concrete does is it traps the radioactivity of tritium in the concrete, and then the radioactivity is trapped and it cannot give radiation doses to people. If you discharge it if you release it into the water, the plants and animals will take it in and it will become part of their bodies and give them radiation doses. So international regulations, IAEA GSG 8 says that if you can avoid radiation doses, you should try if it is feasible. We believe this option is feasible. And the essential question, in my opinion, is not to inspect ALPS, which cannot be done in a short time or a few days in a manner that's effective and meaningful, in my opinion. It's good to go, as I said, but to ask if it is in compliance and whether transboundary effects to the fishing communities, effects to the Pacific countries, Korea, Marshall Islands, Fiji, can be avoided by this method. That, I think, is the essential question to ask.
Right, I see. I really hope those essential questions could be noted by the inspection team and the government. Now, I'd like to ask more questions. I'd like to ask more questions, but since we are running out of time, I believe this would be the last one, Walter. South Korea has maintained a ban on seafood imports from 8 prefectures around the destroyed nuclear plants in 2013. And though the government says easing the ban is not an option yet, some are worried that Japan might ask for the ban to be eased once the inspection is over. What's Japan's point of view here?
Well, Japan has already asked for the restrictions to be eased, and that, I believe, was in March when President Yoon made his visit to Japan. So Prime Minister Kishida had said then that restrictions should be eased in accordance with scientific proof. And indeed, I do believe that this is going to be the next step of what Japan will be asking for from South Korea amid their warming relations. Japan's Foreign Ministry also says that South Korea is now amongst the minority. Only 12 countries and regions continue to impose some restrictions on food imports from Japan in connection with the nuclear accident. So on that note, I do think that it is reasonable to expect that Prime Minister Kishida will continue to seek at least a gradual relaxation of import restrictions, if not an immediate complete lifting of the ban. Whether or not this is politically possible in South Korea, that is something I do not know.
Right, I see. Now, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. But thank you, Walter and Dr. Makazzini, for your insights. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We will be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.